Okay. Hi, everyone. Apologies for the delay in us getting started there. We were having a bit of a technical issue, but we've got everything sorted out now. So we're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar event. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us today for making pollution prevention pay for North Carolina industries. The ECU Center for Sustainable Energy Environmental Engineering proudly sponsors today's event. We're very glad that you could make it here with us today. This is the third event in our summer sustainability series. And as you can see, our next event will be on August 19th on solar energy, where we will have representatives talking about energy efficiency and cost benefits of solar energy in industrial applications. So the mission of the center is to provide scholarly and applied research and consultancy for sustainable energy development and natural resource conservation. We enhance public awareness of renewable energy technology and natural resources by focusing on research and workforce training. And we seek to establish partnerships with businesses and organizations and industries to foster the efforts to benefit North Carolina communities. The center also receives grant funding through the EPA's Pollution Prevention Program for multiple research projects from environmental management, energy management to pollution prevention, most specifically in 4 key economic sectors: food and beverage, automotive, chemical, and manufacturing. We offer energy and lean assessments to different North Carolina manufacturers. We facilitate workshops and on-site training to promote P2 efforts. So today we have 3 wonderful speakers with us who are going to be giving us an overview of concepts and best practices for pollution prevention. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about what specifically is pollution prevention versus waste management. So our first speaker today is going to be Mark Toda from the Kentucky Pollution Prevention Center from the University of Louisville. Mark joined KPPC's technical staff as a senior sustainability engineer in August of 2015. He's responsible for leading the center's engineering team and providing technical assistance to clients pertaining to pollution prevention, energy efficiency, and sustainable manufacturing. And he provides direct assistance to companies in Kentucky and assists in the delivery of training and development of tools and resources. He's also a certified energy manager with the Association of Energy Engineers. He attended Cornell University and worked for 9 years in developing engineering at IBM, and over 30 years of experience in providing engineering and technical assistance to business and industry from the university setting. So working with the Industrial Extension Program at Penn State, he provided engineering-based improvement opportunities to Pennsylvania manufacturing and entrepreneurs in a variety of technical areas, including new product development, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. And he's taught energy mechanics, mathematics, physics, and problem solving at the college level, as well as sustainable engineering and project management. And he holds a BS in bioengineering from Syracuse and his master's in theoretical and applied mechanics from Cornell. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Mark. We appreciate that. Our next speaker will be Marshall Goers from Waste Reduction Partners. Marshall is an environmental engineer with over 35 years of experience in the industry, addressing waste water treatment and air pollution, solid waste management issues. For the past 10 years, he's been an auditor with Waste Reduction Partners in Asheville, including work on solid waste issues. In addition, he spends his time as an environmental health service manager for a small chemical company And he spent a number of years performing pollution prevention audits for Edwards Air Force Base as part of the Air Force compliance through pollution prevention program. Thank you so much, Marshall, for being here with us today. And then last, we will hear from Ariana Billingsley. She is the Regional Center Director for the Small Business and Technology Development Center at East Carolina University. It's a North Carolina business advisory resource for growing and developing businesses. She has extensive experience in advising and assisting small businesses across a broad spectrum of issues, including planning, financial management, human resources, marketing, and operations. She also has expertise with federal, state, and local government contracting laws, policies, and procedures. And during her time with the center, she's assisted over 400 entrepreneurs raise $200 million in debt and equity financing and win over $250 million in government contracting. She holds an MBA from UNC Pembroke and her BS in Business Administration from a university in Albania. She is also a certified economic development finance professional. Thank you so much, Ariana, for being here with us today as well.
Glad to be here.
So with that, what exactly is P2? Most of us are familiar with this image here that promotes the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, and recycle, which are important steps, but what if we expanded that hierarchy to include other concepts like refuse, rethink, and redesign? So I'd like to give you a very simple yet relative example to get your brain going on P2 concepts. So think about this for a minute. Let's think about a single-use plastic straw. According to ourlaststraw.org, plastic straws are among the top 10 contributors to plastic pollution in our oceans globally. And it's estimated that up to 8.3 billion straws are along the world's coastlines. And that's just one item among thousands of other types of marine debris. So it's also estimated that the life cycle of plastic is more than 450 years, which means every piece of plastic produced still remains on Earth today. And production has increased 620% since 1975. Plastic pollution is by far the greatest threat to ocean ecosystems, surpassing industrial toxins, oil spills, global warming, and overfishing. And by 2050, plastic waste will outweigh fish. So before I turn the platform over to Mark, I'd like to leave you with this last thought. Let's say the average price of a single-use wrapped plastic straw is 4 cents. Now, also consider the daily receipts from X mega brand global fast food chain. If every customer uses a straw, this company spends over $143 million a year, $143 million a year to contribute to pollution. While these numbers are a bit inflated, just to illustrate the point, the concept is being heavily debated in the food service industry amongst stakeholders. So what's the possible solution? And this is where we're going to begin to explore P2 concepts at the top of the hierarchy. So refuse, rethink, and redesign. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, to get us started.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kara. Let me just try to share my screen here with you, and just 1 second. Oops. This is not. I apologize. That's not what I anticipated happening here. Are you seeing my screen now, Kara?
Yeah, we see your screen from the PowerPoint perspective, not the presentation perspective.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
Are you using 2 screens?
Yeah, I have two screens. I must have the wrong screen up. Give me 1 second here.
Click a slideshow, Mark.
Yeah, I tried that, but I think it's
There we go.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Okay. My name again is Mark Toda, and what I'd like to talk about today is just to provide an overview of pollution prevention, and then also to talk a little bit about some opportunities that we've been working with here at KPPC. KPPC is the Kentucky Pollution Prevention Center. We are a state-mandated technical assistance center here in Kentucky. We're based at the University of Louisville in the J.B. Speed School of Engineering here at U of L. And so we exist to be an environmental resource here in Kentucky for Kentucky companies. We also receive funding from the U.S. Department of Environmental Protection as well, and providing assistance in that grant with to automotive manufacturers and to the sustainable spirits and distilling and brewing industries here in Kentucky. And we provide assistance to other types of organizations as well here in Kentucky, but our work is primarily in the environmental engineering area. All of our work is free to businesses here in Kentucky. We maintain confidentiality with our clients and of course their confidential information, and we are a non-regulatory group, so we're not necessarily a compliance group, we're really an assistance organization. So we provide assistance to companies to help them with environmental issues. So what I'd like to talk about today is just to give an overview of P2, what P2 really is, pollution prevention. I'd like to talk a little bit about sustainable value stream mapping, which is a tool that we've been using here at KPPC for a couple years now. I want to talk a little bit about water balance, to look at water use and wastewater issues. And then along the way, I want to talk about some pollution prevention opportunities. So again, what is P2? Pollution prevention is any practice that avoids, eliminates, or minimizes any pollutant prior to recycling, treatment, or disposal. So pollution prevention is really avoiding, eliminating, or minimizing a pollutant. So we're trying to prevent pollution from happening. That's what pollution prevention really means, not deal with it after it happens. So that's really the difference, I think. P2 is really source reduction, is another name for it. It again reduces or eliminates the creation of pollutants, primarily through increased efficiency and conservation of natural resources. And again, pollution prevention and source reduction can be used kind of synonymously. This is a little bit of a hierarchy here. You know, if I create some sort of pollutant, whether that's air, water, or solid waste, the only thing I can do is dispose of it. That's the lowest thing on the totem pole here. The next thing I could do is treat that pollution in some way to make it more beneficial. So that's better, more beneficial to the environment. So that's better. Energy recovery is an option. I can recover energy that I have created. So that's obviously a good thing also. I can also reuse or recycle a material, and that's also a good thing. But none of these things below are really source reduction or pollution prevention. Source reduction is at the top of the hierarchy here, so we're trying to, we don't want to create the pollution to begin with. That's really what source reduction is, reducing pollution at the source. That's what we're looking for, and energy efficiency is a part of that as well. And I want to talk about that a little bit. This is just a little graphic I wanted to talk about. On the right, you can see the biological cycle here, and so we may have a nutrient that there's some growth and a person uses that, whether it's an apple off a tree or whatever it might be, and then there's decomposition again, and the biological cycle sort of continues. On the left-hand side, we have the technical cycle, which is we may have a nutrient here, where that might be a raw material or whatever, going into a manufacturing environment. Again, the customer uses that, and then after use, is that product recycled or disposed of, or what happens to that afterwards? If it's recycled, then it just continues in the technical cycle. But recycling really isn't pollution prevention, because at some point in time that product is going to end up being disposed of into the environment or into the biological cycle. And so recycling is really not pollution prevention. Energy efficiency, on the other hand, we say is at the heart of pollution prevention. We do a lot of work with energy efficiency here at KPPC, and so it truly is a part of pollution prevention. When we talk about energy efficiency, what we're talking about is to use less energy to produce the same quantity and quality of goods and services. So we're really looking at what we call energy use intensity, or EUI. That's the energy per unit of production for manufacturers. Or we look at it energy per square foot of the facility, either one. But what we're trying to do is reduce that EUI, that's energy efficiency. Benefits of P2 and E2, there's certainly going to be a competitive advantage if I can reduce both of those things. Worker safety, productivity, if I can create an environment, an atmosphere or a culture of efficiency, it's certainly going to improve productivity within a manufacturing facility. Obviously, resource conservation is there'd be lower costs and also benefits to the environment. So environmental protection, and of course, enhanced public image. Folks like to work with companies that are sustainable and have a bent towards improving the environment. There'll be a decrease in operating costs, compliant costs, and future liability costs. So I'm just kind of going through these sort of quickly, just for the sake of time. But so moving into P2, what are some pollution prevention tools that we want to consider using? And the first one obviously is material balance. And material balance is looking at materials coming into a facility or a process, and what are the materials coming, what are the outputs of that process. Process mapping is another tool where we look at, and I'm going to talk more about this moving forward, but look at each of the different process steps within a manufacturing facility, and understanding the inputs and outputs of each of those process steps. That's something that we need to do from a pollution prevention standpoint. Value stream mapping is taking process mapping to the next level, where we're looking at the value of the product through the manufacturing process. And so value stream mapping is basically a process map, but we're looking at value. As we go through the manufacturing process, value is added to the product at each step along the way. And so we're following that value as it goes through the manufacturing process. And sustainable value stream mapping is taking that value stream map and overlaying on top of that environmental aspects. And I'm going to show you some of that here in a few minutes. The other thing that, as far as a tool that we work with, is a water balance, where we're looking at, again, water coming into the facility and water leaving the facility, and trying to balance that equation in a sense. And I'm going to show you an example of that in just a few minutes here. So again, for process mapping perspective, we're looking at inputs, pounds of material, pounds of hazardous material, gallons of water or solvent would be examples of that coming in. And outputs are pounds of product. Obviously, as a manufacturer, we want to create products, so that's going to be part of what our outputs are. But as we do that, how much solid waste is there? How many pounds of hazardous waste might there be? How many tons of air emissions? And gallons of wastewater. These are things we want to take a look at. This is just again, from a process mapping perspective. If I have a stamping operation, I have so much steel that's coming in. This is something I can measure. I purchased that steel, so these are records that I have. Obviously, I know how many finished pieces come out. Only 92 pounds of finished pieces. Then you can see down here below, I have 8 pounds of scrap steel coming out of the stamping operation. So these are all these materials flowing through my process. I need to be able to take account for and monitor them and understand what's happening within my process. There may be packaging materials too. We have plastic wrap and VCI paper here. There's going to be lubricants and other materials which may come into place. But again, we're looking at inputs and outputs with process mapping here. Along the way, we also need to begin to consider pollution prevention from a life cycle perspective. And that's the reason why I bring this slide up here. You can see this is, again, the technical cycle that I talked about before, where I may have a supplier supplying to an OEM manufacturer, and that manufacturer then selling product to a customer for use, and then end of life. And at each stage along the way, there's going to be pollution potentially occurring from the perspective of solid waste, air, and wastewater at each stage, at the supplier, the manufacturer, and the customer. If this is an automotive manufacturer here, you know, the supplier of parts to the automotive, there's going to be these impacts to the environment. You know, at the manufacturer, there'll be impacts, and the customer use, there's going to be impacts as well. I mean, when the customer drives the car, there's going to be air emissions. When they wash their car, they're going to have wastewater. And they could be disposing of things out of their car. When they change their oil, they're going to be disposing of the the oil filter from the car. And so if I'm a manufacturer, whether I'm a supplier or an OEM manufacturer, one of the things I want to be sensitive to is, how does what I'm doing from a pollution prevention perspective, how is that going to impact the entire life cycle? Not just how it's going to impact my operations, but how is it going to impact the entire life cycle? And so that's an interesting thing that we should be doing from a pollution prevention perspective. This is the ISO 14001 2015 standard, and it is encouraging manufacturers to determine the environmental aspects that they can control and influence, and the environmental impacts considering a life cycle perspective. So the 2015 version of the ISO 14001 standard is really an encouragement towards looking at a life cycle perspective in relation to pollution prevention. This is just a bit of an example from a life cycle perspective of a manufacturer that we have worked with here in Kentucky. And you know, here's the manufacturer in the center. They're providing products, units of product to their customer, but they ship that with cardboard and shrink wrap and various things. So this manufacturer needs to be able to understand and monitor the material that's leaving it. It gets to the customer, and then what happens with their customer? Their customer in this particular case is an OEM manufacturer. But you know, what do they do with a lot of these materials? Do they recycle them or do they landfill them? In some cases, pallets get returned back to the manufacturer here, and so this is again a material that needs to be tracked and monitored as far as pounds of wooden pallets shipped, pounds of wooden pallets returned. How many are reused, remanufactured, or repurposed? And so this is something that this manufacturer needs to be looking at, again, from a life cycle perspective. Also, these are, over here on the left, you can see the suppliers to this manufacturer. And so all these materials, again, need to be accounted for, but also transportation to this manufacturer. What are the environmental impacts from transportation just to bring these materials to the manufacturer? And so manufacturers should be sensitive to that as they're selecting suppliers. How far away are they located to minimize transportation emissions? So back to talking about value stream mapping. Again, a value stream is really all the steps, both value added and non-value added, that brings a product to market. Here, value added are things that you and your customer are willing to pay for. So that's what you need to, that's a good way of thinking about it. You want to pay for materials and labor and things like that, but you don't want to pay for things that are waste, things that are pollution. We don't want to pay for pollution. We want to pay for products. And so that's why we want to prevent pollution. Non-value added are things that you and your customer would not be willing to pay for or shouldn't be paying for. So we want to minimize those things. So this again is value stream mapping, and I'm going to kind of skip over this slide here and talk a little bit about, this is a distillery example, and I'm going to kind of go through this quickly, but just to give you the idea of what a value stream map really is we're looking at materials entering on the left here in this process step number 1. And so what we want to capture is water use that's going into this step. We want to look at processing time and equipment use time. Coming out of this step, we're going to have some work in progress here that enters into process step number 2. And do I add more water or other materials to this in step 2? That's a question. And then again, we're going to have, after this step, we'll have some more work in progress and materials potentially entering into process step number 3. So we need to be able to develop this value stream map. We're basically following the materials and water and energy through the process. This is sort of an entire value stream map for a distillery. We're beginning with grain handling, mash cooking, fermentation, distillation, spirits gauging, and processing here. And so you can see that as the inventory, we're kind of following this inventory. We're starting with bushels of grain coming in here, and then you can see now what we have as inventory now is the actual product moving forward. This is the distillation process here, where we're distilling out the alcohol. So you can see that there's a smaller amount here, but from a energy perspective, what we look at is each of these different process steps, and we list all the motors and pumps and various energy consuming equipment in each particular process step. This is what sustainable value stream mapping is actually doing now. And so we go through and list all the horsepower of all the motors, converting that to kilowatts, and then ultimately coming up with kilowatt hours for each motor in the process. There's also cooling that's involved with chillers and cooling towers at a distillery. And so we capture that as well, both in the mash cooking, the fermentation, and the distillation processes. And you can see these sort of column charts on the bottom give you an idea of where electric demand and electric usage occurs throughout the process. And the reason why this is a valuable tool for pollution prevention is it identifies, where in the process is the most energy used, and then obviously that's going to lead to emissions. So this is our sustainable value stream map. And again, we're mapping the process. If you can see down below here, this is showing the electric demand and the electric usage. And these numbers are different because I have redacted all of this because I don't want to share confidential information today. So that is shown here in the various process steps. Steam usage, which really is relates to natural gas, because steam is made by a natural gas boiler. So this shows the natural gas in these different process steps. And again, there's a lot of natural steam usage in mash cooking and in distillation for a distillery. But we also look at cooling water and chilled water at a distillery also. So this gives us a picture. This is a sustainable value stream map, gives us a picture of energy usage throughout the process. The same sort of sustainable value stream map can really be done for any type of manufacturing operation, whether that be an automotive supplier or an OEM manufacturer. But working through the process steps, and again, following the material and then overlaying the pollution impacts at each process step along the way. This just shows a what we call a water balance, and we've been looking at this. Again, this is a distillery example here again, but what we have is a facility here and so much water coming into the facility. The nice thing about this, we know how much water that is because it's metered. The facility has to pay for that water. We know how much water is going out in the product because we know how many gallons of product are produced. Wastewater is something which comes out of the facility also. Again, that's a metered number, so we can understand what that is. And then stillage is really a waste, which is coming out, and that's stillage is water and the spent grains from the distillation process. And typically the farmers take that and they use that for animal feed and just putting on the land for nutritional value. But the difference between what is supplied, 6 million gallons supplied in a particular month, minus the wastewater, product water, and stillage is our water losses, which you can see are pretty significant here. And so this water balance is a great tool for manufacturers to use to monitor their water use and understand where it's going. And it's something that which manufacturers should monitor on a monthly basis. And if these water losses begin to increase, again, they're from, in this case, from evaporation or leakages, in the facility, various things, like that, then if these start to go up, then, we need to know why that's happening. And what steps can I take within my facility to actually reduce water losses so I can reduce the amount of water needed in the facility. So conservation of water use is an important P2 aspect. So this is really my last slide I want to finish up with, and these concepts come from a guide that was put together. Actually, the executive director for KPPC years ago participated in putting this guide together, and it can be found on the EPA website. It's an organizational guide to P2. And and I just want to end with some of these concepts here. Again, the P2 program should be aligned with the company's vision, mission, and core values. Obviously, that's important. It needs to be systematic, consistent, and organization-wide approach, which is going to require some training. Employees throughout the facility need to be trained on what are the P2 goals. How do we approach P2? How do we measure our environmental impact? And what is the company wanting to do in regard to P2? It's top down and bottoms up. So it needs to be from the upper level management down. There needs to be support. But the folks that are actually doing the work need to provide the suggestions for how to implement pollution prevention within the facility. So it's both top down and bottom up. P2 has become more and more integrated into the core business practices within manufacturers. It used to be sort of something on the side. The environmental engineer was someone on the side looking at this, but not true anymore. It's integrated. Sustainability and P2 are integrated into the core business practices. Success is measured differently in each organization. We need to develop specific goals for the P2 program. What are we trying to accomplish? That will help to lead to success. Utilizing tools to visualize and communicate P2 information, I think, is really critical. help people understand, where they are. And that's why I think the sustainable value stream mapping and the water balance and tools like this are really helpful to be able to visualize actually what's happening within a manufacturing setting. And then again, utilizing process mapping and other problem-solving tools to address P2 issues. So that's what I had for my 20 minutes. I hope I didn't go too far over. But if there are any questions, I will be glad to try to answer them.
Thank you so much, Mark. Very interesting information, especially those last few concepts there, aligning the principles with the mission and the core values of a company, training your engineers, your employees, and having that top-up, bottom-down approach to where everybody collaborates together for the greater cause. So those were some wonderful examples that you put in there. So I really appreciate that. I really appreciate your time. Does anybody have any questions for Mark? Again, if you don't want to be on camera, you can just side chat me. I can ask the question for you. We'll take questions at the end again too, just in case anybody thinks of something later. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and move right along into Marshall next from Waste Reduction Partners. I'm going to share his presentation, and give me just a second. Here we go. Nope, not quite yet. Here we go. All right. Okay, Marshall, it's over to you now.
Very good. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Marshall Gores with Waste Reduction Partners. I've been with WRP for about 10 years now. Prior to that, I worked extensively in environmental consulting, both in the Carolinas, pretty much nationally. At one point, I'd figured out I'd been in most of the contiguous U.S. I started out in engineering, actually, as a field engineer for a company that did a lot of front-end work in industrial wastewater treatment, amongst other things. And so I've seen a great transition from the philosophy of treating end to pipe to a better understanding of the benefits of taking more of a pollution prevention approach. WRP, for those who aren't familiar with us, we're a free service to North Carolina businesses that assist, in addition to P2, with energy conservation, water audits and water conservation. We've started to do more wastewater work, and then we have a solid waste group, and the solid waste group addresses P2. So, next. You can go to the next slide. Okay. I always skip one, but so yeah, pollution prevention, in my mind, is sort of a sensible thing from a technical perspective. Not everybody studies thermodynamics like we engineers do, but it's sort of a consequence of the second law of thermodynamics that if you mix things that are a source of contamination with a clean media, be it air, water, and land, it takes considerable more energy and material to get that back out again. So, without getting into details about it, there was just no doubt about the common sense of taking a P2 approach and source reduction or source treatment, where you can control the cost of anything you might need to do prior to mixing it in a larger batch or leading to more extensive contamination. Early in my career, I was struck, and it made me fascinated with advanced water and wastewater treatment with work done by Dr. McCarty at Stanford University. And if you all take an academic interest in some of the history behind a lot of your water and wastewater treatment process, I recommend looking that back up. It was really fascinating. They used just about every water and wastewater treatment process known to man at that time. It was pretty fascinating. And the intent was to take wastewater and treated to a level to could be mixed back in with drinking water supplies. So, and this next statement is kind of a, something that in terms of sustainability and having a philosophy of P2, you can maximize the use of energies and minimize any associated waste by just by pollution prevention, basically. So you can go to the next slide. Kara, can you advance it?
Are we on the next slide?
Oh,
Anyway, and my career in working with industry precedes the passing of the 1990 Pollution Prevention Act, but it's one of the good consequences of the passing of this was the provision of federal dollars to states to actually finance groups like Mark's, indirectly like ours. In the state of North Carolina, there's always been a P2 pay and a wastewater group that tried to encourage companies to work together on a peer level to try to reuse materials, which I actually had, prior to this in the mid 1980s, actually was involved in a material reuse project where I actually used some of the wastewater information that's available through the state of North Carolina. So the best thing about one of the benefits of the Pollution Prevention Act passed in 1990 is the availability of funds to fund some of these state programs. We can go ahead. So as Mark alluded to, if you're at your facility and you're trying to get your hands around where you're contributing to pollution, what have you, if you take a systematic approach and look over your air emissions inventory, your water balance information, get a handle on all your different waste sources, do an energy use audit, and some of the information Mark alluded to in terms of list of odors, having a sense of how frequently they operate, your steam use, or what have you, reviewing your supply chain relationship with people that ship you things versus things that you're shipping out, and reviewing the consequences of those things on the waste you're generating is an important step in trying to get a handle on this. As an engineer, of course, I've used a lot of process flow diagrams and process and instrumentation diagrams and trying to understand the interrelationships of all the aspects of things. And once you have that basic information, then you look at where you can reduce, where and how you can reuse materials that don't need to be reduced, and what and where you can recycle. I work as a team of people working at Edwards Air Force Base back in the late 1990s as part of a program that the Air Force had started called the Compliance Through Pollution Prevention. And at that time, they used the term compliance burden a lot. And if you consider all the different regulations that the manufacturing sector needs to meet related to environmental issues, you begin to understand what that means. There's so many thresholds associated with SARA, the air regs, water, wastewater, et cetera, that if you try to reduce your pollution and your environmental impact, it's going to benefit you in kind of an indirect way by just making your life somewhat easier, just by reducing that compliance burden. So on the air end, and Mark, I appreciate a lot of the information you did. There's a lot of simple things you can frequently do to reduce pollution impact. Vapor balancing is really, particularly when you're dealing with a volatile and the impacts on VOC, HAPs, of just the simple filling and decanting of things. Vapor balancing is just a simple matter of piping the headworks back to the point where the vapors come from, and basically just having a loop rather than discharging it to the air. There's a lot of instances where you can condense media and return it to the process. Filters and dust control, particularly at the source, just lowers the cost of doing that. Plus, certainly the environmental impact is significant. One of my former colleagues in P2 had a lot of information as we worked with chemical industry on hazardous air pollutant or VOC substitutes for common solvents and what have you. And that data is still out there. And sometimes it's cost effective just to review what changes you can make to your internal processes, just simply to cut down on the pollution impact. And then, of course, energy efficiency and the use of cleaner fuels have direct impacts on air issues at a facility. So here's just an example problem. So if you get 100 million BTU per year of electrical savings, these would be the impacts on greenhouse gas emissions for that level of savings. So it's always worth to consider that there is a tie between your energy savings, both at the facility and then regionally as you work to save energy. I do think one of the benefits of doing a thorough review of your energy use and understanding where most of your energy is used is important, because I think in this era, people a lot of times will look at lighting as mainly because it's low-hanging fruit on energy savings, but a lot of times it won't. I've worked in a number of projects where they looked at that and they thought they were having a significant impact on their energy use, only to find that a bigger issue was natural gas use because of where they were and because of the infrastructure, where gas was a much bigger cost hit for them than. So it's better to look at these things in their totality rather than just get focused on something that's easy, I think, a lot of times. So on the water end, and Mark's presentation went over a lot of this, so I won't spend a lot of time, but a lot of times you just kind of go through sequentially with the information you have to see where your sources of pollution are. There's a lot of benefits too in working with your team internally to give them some awareness of simple things that they can do themselves that help the overall outlook. I know our group got very involved in the zero waste to landfill program in the state in helping to provide resources to companies that were looking to do that. Invariably, what we found was that there were tremendous benefits in getting buy-in of your employers or your employees, to work in teams so that everybody benefits. And a lot of times what that involved was providing some types of employee rewards, splitting into teams, what have you, so you could encourage cooperation in this overall effort to move the company further along. So this is kind of a restating of the hierarchy, of pollution prevention. If you can prevent a waste from being generated at all, that's always going to be preferable. And it depends on the type of industry as to whether that's feasible. If you can take steps from a process standpoint to minimize what's generated, that's going to pay back as well. There are frequently instances where you can find methods of reusing waste. And then recycling is still having to process the material. So if you can find other ways of keeping from having to recycle something by using something that's reusable, for instance, it's still preferable than focusing all your efforts on just on having additional recycling. Under recovery, I was going to mention that in some of this effort that we took with North Carolina and South Carolina businesses to sponsor and provide resources to plants going zero waste to landfill, there are instances where if you have something that's combustible, there are waste to energy facilities that could take that material and actually use it as a fuel, and that is an option. It's not inexpensive, but it's still to a large degree preferable to landfilling from a long-term perspective. And then the repurposing of waste, there are materials or there are markets for taking materials and reusing them in products. There is a program now that we're working on where we're working with companies in North Carolina that use recycled content in their products. So it depends on what you're getting rid of, but that is a market for those materials, and depending on what the material is, that's still, again, preferable than having to dispose of it. So these were a couple of instances where we worked with companies and were able to come up with ways of them saving a significant amount of money. The one was a facility that generated a bunch of rag rope that they were having to landfill, and we were able to actually identify somebody that was able to recycle that, and that was going to save them $80,000 a year in the disposal costs. And then the plastics is a big issue, and if you can just reduce the amount of plastic waste you generate, with this beverage company, we were able to save them about $20,000 a year just by helping them reduce their waste. So as far as resources to help you jumpstart your improvements in P2, I mean, UPA's side is relatively general, but it does give you access to certain things. I've always found that our state's recycling markets director usually there's challenges in keeping it up to date, but it's very useful in trying to identify in and around your facility where there might be a market for something that you're currently disposing of. So it's a really good resource. I encourage you all to check it out. Then you guys, and then that's quite a bit of a change since I started in this field. But North Carolina has the Department of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service, and it is a service to states, industries, to help them with P2 or energy issues or what have you. And in conjunction with that, the Environmental Stewardship Initiative is actually a group of companies, just environmentally focused companies that work together to come up with peer sharing and to share information within industries to kind of come up with solutions or markets or what have you for some of the materials. And then our group is free to North Carolina business. We're grant funded and work with these other two agencies in the state, along with all sorts of North Carolina businesses, to kind of be a free source of advice and a technical resource. So that's all I have. I have a quote here by John Muir that's one of my favorites, that just talks about how interrelated everything is in the world. It's important to recognize that anything that we all have an impact and a part to play in keeping the world a pleasant place to be. So, thank you.
Thank you, Marshall. That was again, another informative presentation. I really enjoyed that you added disposal costs in there, because I think sometimes we don't always think of, what it costs us to actually dispose of our waste, not just to the environment, but to our pockets. So that is the goal of this particular webinar, is to introduce concepts to where we are going to save money and save resources, and put them back where they belong instead of just throwing them away. So I appreciate you adding that. Does anybody have any questions for Marshall at this time? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on into Ariana. She's going to talk a little bit more about what we were just talking about, the cost savings, and how that money is going to go back into your pocket. So I'm going to turn it over to Ariana at this time.
Thank you. All right, let me share my screen here. All right. Can you see my screen?
We can. You're not in presentation mode. There you go.
There we go. All right. Awesome. You can see pretty good. Thank you. All right. So hi and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ariana Billingsley. I am the Regional Center Director with the Small Business and Technology Development Center here at ECU. Normally, when we've done these in person, I always ask people if they know who we are and what we do. I've gotten always a mix, sometimes most of the room, sometimes no one in the room. So I'm, for lack of being able to test that, I'm going to go and give you a little bit of information about who SBTDC is and what we do. So the SBTDC is the Business Advisory Service of the University System. Fancy words for we provide business advice to small business community in North Carolina. We've been funded continuously by the Small Business Administration since 1984. We have been in North Carolina since that time. Initially started at UNC at the General Administration Office. We set up the first two offices. I think the first one was in Western Carolina, and then we expanded to Elizabeth City. So we kind of made our way to the center. We have several different offices, and I'll cover that here shortly with a map. We are a nationally accredited organization, so every 4 years we go through an accreditation process. A team of peers visits us and goes through our process and procedure to make sure that we are consistent in following those. Our bread and butter, it's one-on-one counseling, confidential, and free of charge. I hate to say free because it's paid for by tax dollars, but for all intents and purposes to the business, our counseling, it's free. The key elements of what we do, we focus on in-depth advisory services. So what is the difference? Like I always get the question, what is the difference between you and a consultant? Well, first, we don't charge. But second is that we, instead of doing it for you, we actually teach you how to do better what you do. So hence our tag, your business better. We provide management with tools and resources. Most of the time, those resources can be in the form of research that we might do on the industry. It might be in analysis of their financial statements, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on with the example that I have, or we'll provide other tools like sometimes businesses come to us and say, we're looking to do a loan. What is the bank going to ask me for? And can you help me with that? So we'll provide them, depending on the bank, we'll provide them sort of like a list what the bank is looking for, and then templates for a business plan and financial projections, and then work with them as they're completing them. So our focus, it's on the three big M's: your money, your management, and your market, which is the three important things when it comes down to the business. Our focus is small business, so we do work some with not in business companies, but in North Carolina, because we are so fortunate to have a very strong community college, which has its own program called the Small Business Center, which focuses primarily on what we refer to as pre-venture or not in business, and lots of training, which we refer clients all the time. Some of the services, so other than the general business counseling, which, as I mentioned, that's your big 3 M's, we also have statewide specialty services. One of those is our government contracting assistance program. We have a team of counselors across the state of North Carolina that focuses on advising businesses on how to approach government contracting, be it at a local, state, or federal level. We also have our tech commercialization counseling, hence the T in our name. This is a team of counselors that works with companies or individuals who might have a IP or intellectual property, and they are looking to start a business around that IP. So they walk them through the process of accessing funding, be that private funding or diluted funding or non-diluted, so grants that may be available. International business development, it's exactly what it means. If you're looking at expanding outside of the state of North Carolina or outside of the United States, we have a team of counselors that help with identifying the appropriate markets, how to do business, how to access export financing, and so forth. And then we additionally have market research and private equity initiative. What these two services are, these are very much ad hoc based on a client's needs. Market research, this is further in depth, typically demographics and other information based on, like a good example of that research was a client was looking at opening a second location. They were considering a couple of different markets. We had our market research folks in Raleigh do an analysis of the different demographics, cross-reference them with population and ideal customer for this client, and they identified 2 different areas where client would be well positioned to start their second location. Private equity, it's related a lot to if you have a tech type business, so an IP-based, intellectual property-based, and you're looking at making a presentation to angel networks or other VCs, the venture capitals, we have someone on staff that can walk you through that process, what that looks like, how to approach them, how to present, and then kind of coach you through that. And as I mentioned earlier, we have 11 regional service centers and 16 offices altogether. We're located at UNC system campuses, so we are at pretty much all the campuses. And among these different centers across the state, we cover all the 100 counties in the state of North Carolina. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention we're one of 63 programs across the country. So the SBDC program, it's pretty much, if there's anybody here who's not from the state of North Carolina, although I don't know that there is, but if there is, there's an SBDC. We're one of the few that has the T component in the state where you're in. So some of the staff expertise here out of the ECU Center, there is 10 of us all together. Some are local here and some are covering our area out of Raleigh. Most everybody has some sort of financial background. Most of our individuals have a background in business or marketing or human resources or all of the above sometimes. A good amount of our counselors hold the EDFB, just like I do, the Economic Development Finance Professional. This is a pretty rigorous Usually take about 9 months to go through the certification process from the National Development Council, which is the council that typically interacts with different entities across the United States whenever they're looking at development, and especially SBA lending and such. So some of the things that we develop and we work with our clients, or tools that we use when we're working with them, especially as they're seeking capital or resources internally, be it in this case to implement one of the recommendations or multiples of the recommendations coming out of the P2 team recommendations, or if you're looking at expanding, or right now, one of the things that we're seeing quite a bit of, it's businesses that are looking at accessing funding through the different disaster-related grants, like the or loan programs. So the payroll protection program, the shuttered venue grant, or the economic injury disaster loan. So we've worked, that's been sort of like our main focus over the last year and a half. But some of the tools that we use, it's typically a profit sense analysis. This is the same that most CPAs, sometimes attorneys use. It compares the company, and you'll see a few examples later on what that looks like, but it compares a company's financials, typically the last 3 years. Sometimes we have more because we have clients who give their financials to us on a yearly basis. So it compares them with, or benchmarks them with, other similarly situated companies within the same geographic area. So let's say if we have a furniture company or t-shirt manufacturing, like a mill, it compares them to the same type of business, to another mill, and it's based on the industry code, or what we refer to North American Industry Classification System, which is a 6-digit code, and the same revenue. So if the company is making less than $1 million, or $1 million to 10, or $1 million to 5, so it's comparing apples to apples rather than different companies of different sizes across the nation. And we utilize that quite a bit to benchmark the company and identify some areas of opportunity. Further with that, we also do a market research. We use several different tools, IBIS report, vertical IQ, RMA, different things, similar like what a bank would use, especially if you go in for funding. These tools look at the company 5 years, or look at the industry as a whole, the previous 5 years, and then make some recommendation or prediction as to what that industry will look like in the next 5 years. Some of the reports go more granular, focusing more on a small business, so we can get both the 3,000, 30,000 foot view, and then get down in the weeds to understand that industry and provide some feedback to the client. From these, and so all of this information we gather, then we develop a strategy. So what are the steps the company needs to take? How do we take that and then walk the company? We also do sometimes a management assessment if it's necessary, sort of like who's doing what and how they're going to implement that going forward. And then we'll work with the client to implement the program, or to implement whatever the recommendations, and kind of walk with them across them. Some of the so what is the value to the business? Why do we do all of this? Obviously, it improves the understanding of where the business sit in comparison. Sometimes, and I've seen over the almost 10 years I've been doing this, I see several businesses that are doing well, but how well are we doing if we don't compare with other companies in this industry? Like, where do we stack? How are we doing? It also, it's all the information that we provide them, the industry information. Most of these reports, we're talking 30 to 50 page reports that are pretty detailed. We kind of pare them down, but these reports, a small business would have to spend anywhere between $800 to about $2,000 to get one of these reports. They're things that we pay for to have access to, and then we can share the pertinent information with the client and kind of how does that apply and then make those improvements that will increase sales, will increase their profitability, or just simply sometimes streamline the company, where they can recognize how the potential is for the company to grow, what kind of resources are available internally versus externally, how to access what is the benefit, the long-term and the short-term benefit. So I wanted to bring sort of a case study that we work. So Tarek and SBTDC go back a few years now through different iterations of this program, and we've worked with several companies. So they'll go through. Sometimes they may be a client, sometimes they are not a client, and they work with Tarek and his team, and then they reach back to us because they're interested in implementing some of the recommendations, one or more of the recommendations that came out. Here's an example of a company. Obviously, because all of the information is considered privileged and we don't share it, names have been altered and some of the numbers have been altered here so that we can protect the guilty, or I mean the innocent. So this animal food manufacturer, it's here in North Carolina. They approached us after they went through one of the P2 audits to kind of and got their recommendations. They've been in business for 10 years, and they're like, we're really interested in these different recommendations. Several of them look like they're going to save us money. So how can you help us from here? And the first thing that obviously we asked from them is the most recent 3 years of their financials. We will make allowances for 2020. That was a different year for everybody. So we got from them specifically, we ended up getting a couple more, but 3 years worth of financials, obviously the most recent 3 years was what we would require. So they had been before going through this particular inventory or this particular audit, they had been looking at some different equipments, looking at potentially expanding their supply chain. So this was very timely for the company as well as Tarek's team. So here were some of the recommendations. Obviously, some of these have been changed a little, as I said, to protect the confidentiality of the work that we do. But some of the recommendations were some of the typical ones you may expect, like change to LED lighting, include some skylights. There was a recommendation for an air compressor, and then there was some recommendations coming in terms of the energy efficiency of the machinery that the company was utilizing. So from these, the first thing that we did was that profit sense analysis of the last 3 years. The report is actually pretty thorough. It goes through 5 or 6 different items. Specifically, it goes through the profitability or the liquidity of the company. So how much cash flow, free cash flow does the company? So how much cash or assets they can convert into cash within a short period of time. This is your typical short-term assets, so your cash, your accounts receivables, and so forth. How profitable is the company in comparison to other companies? So you can see there's a scoring to this company. How are their sales doing year over year in comparison? They're borrowing. So obviously it's using the same, like the street lights, the green, the yellow, and the red. Obviously, if it's green, it's good. If it's yellow, it's like, take a look at it. And if it's red, you really need to take a look at it. Sometimes, because this is system generated, sometimes the red might not necessarily be bad. It's just a score. So they're borrowing. The company wasn't really borrowing a lot of money. They had some long-term debt, but they really hadn't been borrowing a lot. So they hadn't leveraged that. And their assets, obviously, some of them were well-used equipment that had been completely depreciated. The report, as I said, it goes in very much in detail of all these 5 different items, and it kind of gives you an overview and some recommendations. What we normally do, because these recommendations are generated from a system that's looking at numbers strictly, we go in and obviously adapt some of those for the company to adjust, or for the company to take into consideration and implementing. One of the things that we focus quite a bit, obviously we'll give the company a copy of the report. Typically it's about 20 pages or so as a report. The first page starts with this colorful part that I'm showing here. So part of the financial analysis that will be on the report, and I kind of copied and pasted some parts of this report. So it's looking at two different instruments, financial instruments. It's looking at your P&L or profit and loss statement, and then it's looking at the balance sheet statement. We're not going to look at the cash flow statement because we're getting annual numbers, not yearly numbers. So the company, the first three numbers on this column, starting from the left to the right, the first three numbers are what is the company doing, and these are the three most recent years. That very last column on the right hand side, so the first one on the right hand side of the is your where's the company stacking in comparison to other companies similarly situated. And this one, I know I've cut it when I put it on the slide, but it's 517 examples. And these are self-reported companies, obviously, or other ones that have been entered by accountants, CPAs, or sometimes attorneys, sometimes banks. So this company, just by looking at here, at that very last line, the company's been at 76% of their sales in their cost of goods sold, in their raw material, basically, 78% the following year, and then 79% the most recent year. The industry's at 73%. That's a 6% variance in cost of goods sold. This company was doing, in the example, it gives the sales at 5 million. So 6% of that, that's $300,000 that the company, it's overspending in their cost of goods sold that they could control. Now, this can be something, it may be the material they're purchasing. In this particular case, it was their supply chain. So they were paying more. And the equipment that they were considering to replace this older version that was utilizing more energy and costing them in repairs as well, would likely be an improvement up to that 6% of the cost of goods sold. So we kept looking at their financials. Another portion of it, this is part of their P&L, continued of their P&L. So their SGA, or sales general administrative, this is typically your overhead most of the time. So like your rent, your electric, and all that. If you look, the company was doing better than the rest of the industry. So they were like at 2%. However, if you look at through all the different lines and how they're spending, their spending overall was, or their earnings overall, their spending decreased their revenue or their sales revenue, resulting in the earnings, which is like in our world, the EBITDA, it's like your typical, your bottom line without like the tax or the tax reducing element. So it's the earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. So even though the company was doing really well, their overall EBITDA, the revenue, it's less by 5% the most recent year. So they're at 1% of their sales in their EBITDA versus the 6% that the company or the rest of the industry or similarly situated companies are doing. And that on a $5 million a year company, that's about $250,000 difference there. So, and some of that was, you know, if you go up and down these different, as I said, the first three on your left, that's where the company is at, versus where the industry is, which is that very last column starting from the left, or the very first column starting from the right. So some of the recommendations that we made was, you know, obviously to reduce their cost of goods sold and be in line with the industry. How does that now relate to the recommendations, where the new piece of equipment that they were recommended, or change, not specifically a piece of equipment, but change in what they were doing, that fit right in with what the industry was doing. Purchasing this new equipment would result not just simply in energy saving, but also in helping with their supply chain and further reducing their overall cost of goods sold. Reduction of their overall overhead expenses, again, was something we recommended, so that their revenue, their EBITDA, would be more in line with where the industry is. So the purchase of the new machinery would reduce their cost, just in the energies used, would reduce their cost in terms of their and that goes into the pollution. We're not focused as much in the pollution part of it. We're focused strictly on what the numbers will support, what the recommendations were. So the new piece of equipment they actually ended up purchasing allowed them for a vertical integration, so they could buy, instead of buying pellets or something like that, they could buy the complete raw material, and this new piece of equipment would basically cut and allow for a vertical integration. So start making their own pellets, and then continue with the rest of productions that they've done before. One of the things we recommended them, and the timing was right for it. It doesn't always mean it is, but we recommended that they get a 504 loan. It's an SBA loan guarantee. The SBA has two different products. One's a 504 and one's a 7A. The 504 loan, it's specifically focused on asset purchase, like long-term assets, piece of equipment, property, and so forth. And the terms are a lot better because it allows you to expand that repayment up to 20 years or 25 years for real estate. So the SBA 504 comes from the 5, or the name, it's like 50, stands for the 50, 10, and 40. So 50% of the loan, it's guaranteed, or it's the loan comes from a bank that participates in this program. 10% is the owner, and then 40% it's a community development organization, or CDFI. There's 2 of them in the state of North Carolina that we've worked. I understand there's 4 now, but 2 of them that we work with. We work with on a regular basis when the clients are going through this process, and one's the self-help and the other one is the BEFCOR. So, once we identified this as a good project, then we kind of got into the weeds of the thing. So, what sources are we going to use? We recommended the 504 because of the financials would support a loan. In order to do that, we kind of looked at what is the debt service going to cost on that loan, using that type of loan, how to an adjusted cash flow. Then we got into the third instrument, financial instrument, which is the cash flow, sort of what this would look for the next for this year, and then for the next years going forward. We calculated your debt coverage ratio, which is the bank's going to ask for that. And then obviously if you're going through a bank, whether or not you're a brand new business, if you're going for a loan, you're typically going to be asked to provide a business plan and obviously financial projections, at least for 3 years, sometimes longer than that. And we walk the client through what the structure of the loan would look like. So in this particular scenario, the loan payments for the clients are utilizing that 504 loan. The total project ended up being, even though the recommendation had been like another piece of equipment, once clients started looking, allowing for that vertical integration, they ended up purchasing a more expensive piece of machinery that would allow for that ended up being about $750,000, which included the training to their employees to utilize this new piece of equipment. What that ended up doing for the client was there was a $35,000 on their financials that they were utilizing to basically keep this older machine in place and working. And then obviously the energy efficiency was at least a 5% that we could, right off the bat determine. And I'm sure like as we look forward further years, that was probably very conservative. So based on the 504 loan, so the bank's brought in 50%, the CDFI 40%, and then the borrower had to bring to the table 10%. They already had in their accounts receivable. This goes into further analysis on how they could come up with that $75,000. We helped them kind of generate that internally to the company. And then the other two loans, they were able, the process is not, it says 90 days. That's 90 days from when the bank has a complete application or a complete package, which means they can come back after the first package you submit and ask for additional information. That's their prerogative. It's their money basically. So once they submitted, it took a few months for it to go through. I think it was like I want to say 4, maybe 6 months. It was somewhere between 4 to 6 months that loan went through. But what that resulted in after that first year was like a 2.75% decrease of their cost of goods sold, which is basically about $125,000 a year saving. Their loan payment, their annual payment was $53,000. So you can obviously do the quick calculation here and see how beneficial and how more profitable the company was. So it's almost 3 times over what they were spending or they saved versus what they're spending. So this is an overly simplified example of this, because obviously there's a lot of work that went through and that happened as the company came to the decision, as they identified the piece of equipment. So it's not like it wasn't a simple implementation, but it was one that resulted in increased profitability, reduction of costs, and increased profitability for the company, all while still basically being energy efficient and probably a reduction in pollution as well, being that this was a newer piece of equipment. So we've done some smaller ones in previous years where it was, simple utilizing. We had a company that produces dental equipment. One of the recommendations that was fairly simple for them to implement was a quick, utilize solar panels in the back of the building where they were at, and that reduced their cost. They ended up at the time, there were some tax credits and some credits that the state was given for utilizing solar panels, and they went, I think they were completely, if not completely, they were pretty close to being completely on solar versus the utilizing electricity. So, and that was a smallish project, if you will, not as deep as this one ended up being. So, any questions? On the presentation, my contact information was at the beginning. So if you do have any questions, or you need to send me an email, or just want to have a conversation about how we may be able to help with your company, with your business, we'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. And that's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Ariana. Any questions for Ariana today? Okie dokie. Well, again, all of our speakers' presentations are available underneath the Files tab of the meeting, and also in the chat feed as well. Additionally, you will find a link to a feedback page where you can give us feedback on today's webinar. Again, everybody's contact information is on their presentations as well if you'd like to reach out to them with specific questions. Otherwise, I would like to just thank the speakers today, Mark, Marshall, and Ariana, all three of you. Very interesting information, a lot of detail, a lot of detailed information to think about. So very valuable resources that we're giving you today. So again, thank you so much for joining with us. If this is your first time joining us, we at the center do provide these webinars free with a donation and sponsorship to the center. If you would just consider maybe donating to the center today, I've provided a link here. The funding supports student research engagement, competitions, scholarships, these webinars and training, and we appreciate any support that is given to the center. Otherwise, that's going to wrap up today. Thank you again for joining us. Again, our next event on solar energy, plugging North Carolina industries into the sun, will be August 19th from 1:30 to 3 again. Again, the registration is provided, and I'm sure you'll hear from me again just to remind you. So otherwise, any other questions? Okie dokie. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you guys have a really great weekend. And I can't stop sharing. There we go. Have a really great weekend, and thank you so much again, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.